Half the playoff spots in the NHL have been clinched, but the other half are wide open. We've got that plus our women's hockey spotlight and an exciting weekend of NHL action ahead, all coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome, everybody, to the Friday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Rachel, happy Friday to you. And we are, about 2 weeks, a little less than 2 weeks away from the end of the NHL season.
We are, and I hate to make an earthquake comparison when we just had one here on the East Coast, but things are shaking up in the East.
Yeah, it's crazy. Here we are with about 12 days left in the season, and 4 spots have been clinched in the East, 4 playoff spots have been clinched in the West, and yet, in the East, we don't even know who the final 2 teams are going to be. And in the West, the order of those teams at the bottom of the playoff standings are wide open. Let's start in the East because both of our teams are among the 5 teams fighting for those 2 spots. First of all, why does it feel like nobody wants to pull away here?
I think that there's probably some end of season fatigue and wear and tear going on, right? And then we're all playing each other and it's intense because the NHL schedule gods decide to put all of the division rivalry games toward the end of the season. And I think that is honestly a big part of it. And so, the points are evening each other out a little bit when we all play each other as part of this. But your New York Islanders did win last night versus Columbus. So now they're the 8th seed as of Friday morning and in a playoff position.
But it's very tenuous because right now Washington is 1 point behind them, and yet they have a game in hand on both your Flyers and my Islanders, so they could jump past them both, with just one win. So depending on how all of that shakes out, look, you have Philadelphia and the Islanders with 83 points, Washington and Detroit with 82, and Pittsburgh with 81. That's 5 teams separated by 2 points, and only 2 of them can get into the playoffs.
Yeah, and so you have the Caps and the Red Wings with 7 games remaining, the Pens, Isles, and Flyers with 6 games remaining. I just feel like anything can happen at this point.
Yeah, and then right now you have Philadelphia on a 5-game losing streak. You have Washington on a 4-game losing streak, and meanwhile the Islanders and Penguins have both won 3 in a row.
Yeah, and so it feels like the Penguins are making this last-ditch surge to try and get one of the slots here, and they're not out of it yet, which is a little surprising to say, given how the bulk of their season has gone. But yeah, I think like the Pens and the Caps are the 2 most interesting teams in this conversation because, both of these teams had struggles over the course of this season, but have made last ditch surges to try and get a playoff spot. But the Caps have stumbled quite a bit recently. The Pens won against the Caps, and that's how they're within 2 points of a spot right now. So I think that, it's just going to be who wants it more and who's less broken, honestly.
Yeah, that does seem to be the equation. And, you have all those teams going for the 2 spots in the East. And the sort of wild card is that you have 3rd place in the Metro also up for grabs in that equation. That gives the Metro teams a little bit more runway when it comes to trying to make the playoffs during this home stretch.
Yeah, I think that, that's the key to everything right now is that third spot in the Metro, because I think, anybody in those wild card spots are going to have an extremely difficult opponent to play in that first round. And so, getting that third spot is going to be key to have any playoff success, I think, for any of these 5 teams trying to get there, right?
Yeah, it definitely does make things a little bit easier. Although, depending, that probably means facing the Carolina Hurricanes, which is not necessarily an easy opponent either. Out west, congratulations to the Winnipeg Jets. They became the 4th team in the Western Conference to clinch a playoff berth. And it looks like we know who the 8 teams are going to be. St. Louis is hanging on by a thread right now, 7 points behind the LA Kings with 6 games remaining. The big question out west is seeding.
Yeah, I think so. So you look at, the Jets having clinched last night, which is something, that was a little dicey for a while, but they got it together and they've had a good run here. And so, and that pretty much solidifies the Central Division top 3, right? And Nashville, they could, I don't think they're going to get up there because it's a 6-point gap between those 2 teams with the same number of games played. So if you consider Dallas, Colorado, and Winnipeg locked in, and then you have Vancouver and Edmonton locked in the Pacific, you basically have Vegas and the Kings fighting for that 3 spot in the Pacific, with, the Vegas Golden Knights have 92 points and the LA Kings have 91 points, only 1 point back, but Vegas has a game in hand. Like, that is the big battle here. And then Nashville will end up in the other wild card spot, depending on how the other team of that Vegas LA battle, the points end up.
And right now, Dallas has a 3-point lead over Vancouver. Dallas now winners of 8 straight games to take over that first spot in the Western Conference, while the Canucks have been just 5-4-1 in their last 10. Of all the times to sort of, I wouldn't even say slump at 5-4-1, but to cool off a little bit, Vancouver picking a bad time.
Yeah, honestly, it's going to be a struggle. But if you look at the current potential playoff matches, if this is the locked in playoff scenario, Vancouver would play Nashville. And I find that to be really intriguing. And because I think that the way Vancouver has been playing versus how Nashville has, Nashville would have a shot there, in my opinion.
Well, it would all depend on some hot goaltending, I think, more than anything else. But, UC Saros has the ability to get hot at the right time. So that would be very interesting. And then what would the other matchups be out west?
So you'd have Dallas against LA, Colorado against Winnipeg, which is a series I want to see for sure.
Yes.
And then Edmonton against Vegas. Again, we talked about this potential matchup last week. That's a grudge match that you always want to see.
And then out east?
Boston versus Tampa. Again, love to see it. Florida versus Toronto, rematch. Love it. Rangers versus Islanders, city battle. Love to see that. And then Carolina against the Flyers.
Yeah, that would be, and the crazy thing is that by the end of tonight, all of those matchups could be very
out the
very
window.
Different. Oh boy. All right. We have got a lot more to discuss on today's show. We will have Erica Ayala join us for our women's hockey spotlight. Plus, we will discuss a big weekend ahead with a lot of games that impact the playoff situation. We've got all that and more coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you could still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of first quarter 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. It is time for our bi-weekly women's hockey spotlight. That means we turn to Erica L. Ayala. And Erica, great to have you back.
Always a pleasure to be here to talk women's hockey.
Let's kick it off with the IIHF Worlds. Fill us in. What's happening there?
Well, first we have our annual tournament. It's happening in Utica, New York. The Women's World Championships happens every April. So I believe we mentioned it last time that there is a little bit of a break in the PWHL schedule. And we've had not all teams have played 2 games, but we'll have another crop of games today we can talk about a little bit later. But, I think, Rachel, what we were kind of talking about off air is that what might be surprising to some people is Finland losing 2 games. But I don't know, given that they've played already Canada and Czechia, I'm not as surprised.
Yeah, I think that, as we've seen over the past couple of years, Czechia is a team that has improved a lot over this time period and really has like a lot more elite players in world hockey than they've had in the past. And so I think that, if anybody was going to kind of move into that 3 slot in women's, international hockey, like Czechia is definitely a top contender there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what's also great is, at least in that game against Finland, Team Czechia, we weren't necessarily seeing the names that people might recognize for those who follow the CWHL, the NWHL/PHF, or even the PWHL now. You're seeing some of the young talent. And I think that also speaks to, though, what we've seen at the U18 level, is that we've seen Czechia also be competitive. And I feel like we've talked about it on the program before, Gil, but when you have a pipeline of talent, and we've seen Czechia, I'd argue even on the boys and men's side, you've seen that they've really started to develop their talent young. And I think that's, growing dividends right now. And we'll see. They're going to have a game. They play the US, I believe it is today. Yes.
Yeah.
April 5th. So that's going to be a big one. Canada and Switzerland also playing today, and Sweden and China. But I mean, Gil, just again, talking about the pipeline, this is a country that I think we're really seeing is developing talent young, and they're anchoring that talent throughout North America, not just in the NCAA and even U Sports for some of these countries, but also now in professional leagues.
Yeah, and it's an investment. You make that investment when they're young, and you bring them along, and hopefully it pays dividends. And for so long, we've talked about the United States and Canada being head and shoulders above the rest of the competition in women's hockey. And it's good to see other teams starting to rise and sort of lower that gap between the big 2 and everybody else.
Yeah, for sure. And I think they're getting even scoring as well. But that kind of takes me to go to the leaders, at least among the skaters first. And we see some familiar names, maybe surprising to some people following the PWHL, but top scorers coming from the US and Canada right now. And that is one forward, Hillary Knight, and defender Ella Shelton. Now, both are in the PWHL, but we've talked about how Hillary Knight, maybe a little bit of a slow crawl offensively for PWHL Boston, Rachel, but here she is once again in international competition. It's only been 1 game for the US, as we mentioned, but still at the top of the table.
Yeah, it is interesting to see, is this because they played Switzerland, quality of competition? Is it because Hillary Knight always takes it up a notch in international competition versus maybe the slog of a regular season pro league? We know that, even in the NHL, regular season is a different thing from playoffs, and this could have a similar mentality thing. But yeah, I think it is interesting. You've got Kendall Coyne Schofield already in the top 5 there as well. And so, like, are the leaders of Team USA like rising to the challenge for this particular tournament?
It's very possible. I mean, we talk about veteran leadership in just about any sport. It makes a difference. And in a short tournament where you really have to get your A game out the gate and work to develop over time, but in quick succession, like you have to have a quick turnaround. I think that veteran leaders, they just know what is required. They know the level of competition, relatively speaking. And so maybe that does have something to do with it. But we talked about Team Czechia. They have some young guns that have been scoring. And Rachel, we also see that, the U.S. has a young defender also in the mix. Again, it's only been the one game. You also did mention it's been Switzerland, but Haley Wynn comes from Clarkson University, also in the top 3 scoring right now in the IIHF Women's Worlds Tournament.
Yeah, it's really good to see. And I think, one of the things that, the narrative around Team USA is, can they make this transition from the veteran names that we're all used to, like a Hillary Knight, like a Kendall Coyne Schofield, into a next generation of players and continue the level of success they've had. And she's a prime example of that.
Yeah, for sure. And we were talking offline also that is from Rochester, New York. So maybe also just kind of familiar with the territory. And I would imagine has at least some family, if not friends, and maybe even former teammates kind of coming through to support. So Haley Wynn, again, played at Clarkson, or was playing at Clarkson University, tallied 39 points overall this season, 23-24, 10 goals and 29 assists as a defender, and is also familiar with the team that we want to talk about in our next bullet point here, and that is the Ohio State University. Clarkson fell in the postseason to Ohio State en route to OSU's second national championship. Congratulations to the Ohio State University. I remember talking to Nadine Muzerall, and she is a firecracker of a human. And from what I've heard, has also been very much advocating for OSU. This is a relatively new program. They're investing, to Gil, your point earlier, they've been investing in the women's program. And, Coach Muzerall is kind of a no-nonsense coach. Plays in the WCHA, which we know is a conference just stacked historically with national champions. Actually, Clarkson being the only, still the only national champion outside of the WCHA. They play in, I believe it's the ECHA. And so I think this is great to have a young team, a young program, I should say, really be able to come out the gate. And we've also seen, Gil, that college hockey is catching on in, quote unquote, these non-traditional markets. We've seen in North Carolina, there's been an expansion. I mean, I'm not to make it all about the Seattle Kraken, but Joey Decord maybe, has made the ASU situation a little bit more palatable, at least to Kraken fans, because there's a good storyline, him going back to a place where he never played, but he did play for that program, but not in Mullet Arena. But, the rise of the college game, I think, is going to be very interesting to see how it impacts both the men's and women's professional side. I mean, do you see that as a viable, option outside of just the junior track? Do you think we'll see more people stick with the NCAA down the road?
I think we will. And I think it's, over the years, I remember even when I was back in school, the pipeline was a lot less, and it has grown over the years. And, you mentioned Ohio State winning the Frozen Four. Now there's talk. I'm a Michigan alum. Michigan Wolverines only have a club team right now, but there's talk, hey, if Ohio State won, maybe it's time for us to upgrade and have a varsity team for women's hockey. So it's all positive in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And the University of Delaware recently announced plans for a D1 women's program as well. And it's being supported by the Philadelphia Flyers NHL team. And they've already hired their head coach. They're not going to play their first season, not this coming year, but the following year, because it takes a lot of planning to put a D1 program together. But they're well on their way. And I just see the growth of D1 programs in women's hockey as something to really look forward to. I do want to say just a quick note about Ohio State. Love to see Joy Dunn as Rookie of the Year in women's college hockey. We all know, and I think like in the Ohio State women's hockey community, like Jinsey Dunn is the name that we all know from Ohio State, and this is her younger sister. So it's good to see that family tradition continue with an absolutely elite level of women's hockey.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that, sibling connections. We know that they are very strong in hockey in particular, it seems like. But also shout out to Kayla Barnes, who, just came into, the NCAA at a time where she's been able to expand her eligibility for quite some time, but finally gets a championship, played with Boston College for a number of years, and then went through the transfer portal to OSU, and so now has a national title.
Talk to us a little bit about the PWHL. What's happening there?
Yeah, so I think we mentioned it on our last segment that there's a little bit of a break, and that's because 39 different players from the PWHL are actually competing in the IIHF Women's Worlds tournament. So we've already mentioned Hillary Knight. We've already mentioned Kendall Coyne-Schofield. We've mentioned Ella Shelton. Actually, all three of them playing for different teams, with Boston, with Minnesota, and with New York. Shelton in New York. So there's a little bit of a break there. Teams are still practicing for those athletes not competing in Worlds, so they'll just get a little bit more repetition. It also means for some of those players that we've seen on the injured reserve, maybe just a little bit more time to focus on their recovery and hopefully get back to the ice. But also, we got an announcement that we know what the players are going to be playing for. They have announced that the trophy for the PWHL, and a lot of people wondering, because of course the Isabel Cup was the trophy in the PHF. It started with the NWHL. The CWHL had the Clarkson Cup. And so the PWHL will have the Walter Cup. And per the press release, the naming of the Walter Cup was proposed by sports icon and PWHL advisory board member Billie Jean King. And if you're wondering who is Walter, or the Walter family more specifically, Mark and Kimbrough Walter are a part of, and effectively the ownership group that owns the PWHL.
Erica, thank you so much. Always great to hear from you. And I know you'll be back in a couple of weeks for the bi-weekly Women's Hockey Spotlight.
Sounds good. Thank you both.
Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
All right, we have got a very busy weekend of hockey ahead, and all of it just about. I mean, every game, every day, lots of games going to have an impact on the playoff picture, especially tonight. We start with the Flyers visiting Buffalo. Sabres' chance is kind of hanging on by a thread, and the Flyers need to get back on track. What's going on in Philly?
Yeah, I think it's impossible to talk about any of these games on their own, simply because the results are so interconnected in terms of what the outcomes would mean. You have to look at it as a sum total for tonight's games. But yeah, this is like probably the last ditch effort for the Sabres here. With a win and some other scenarios happening, they could move within 4 points of the last playoff spot. But for the Flyers, like this weekend back to back against the Sabres and the Blue Jackets is everything, because you look at the potential results after tonight. They could be in third in the Metro, they could be wild card 2, or they could be outside the playoffs entirely. So the only way to guarantee that the outside the playoffs does not happen is to win this game. And without Captain Sean Couturier, it's going to be an interesting battle in Buffalo.
No doubt, no doubt. Now, the Red Wings also in the thick of that playoff hunt. They host the New York Rangers. That's not going to be an easy opponent either.
No, and I think that, the Red Wings have had moments of brilliance, and then they come back down to earth, and against a team like the Rangers, who just seem to be plowing through the league, I think that this is going to be a tall order for them, even though it is a home game.
And the Rangers are battling for first place overall in the East and to try to clinch first place in the Metro. So they have incentive as well. The Capitals have another tough battle. They head down to Carolina to face the Carolina Hurricanes.
Yeah, and I think that if there's any team that the Caps would not want to face in this scenario, it is the Carolina Hurricanes. This has become kind of a grudge match in the Metro over the last little bit, although I think Carolina would say it's more of a rivalry than the Caps would, just simply because of history. But I do think that this is a big deal for both teams because, obviously, as we just talked about, the Caps need these points, and Carolina needs to finish out strong going into the playoffs here. And I just, man, this is gonna be a good one.
Yeah, and it could be a playoff preview as well. Colorado in Edmonton, that's always a great matchup.
Yeah, so if the Avalanche get at least 1 point in this game, that means that maybe there's wiggle room for that first place spot in the Central. So I think that there's a lot of incentives here for the Avalanche in this game.
Yeah, should be. And again, just a dogfight. And meanwhile, Edmonton also battling for positioning and for them, they have some games in hand on some of the teams they're chasing. So they've got to take advantage of that. Saturday, as usual, a busy slate of games. And we are going to start with the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Pittsburgh Penguins. That's the matinee game at 1:00 Eastern on ABC in the United States.
Yeah, and it's a good game for them to pick. Again, we talked about the Penguins earlier in the show, that they have miraculously found themselves in this competition, going up against Tampa, who is a team that is trying to hit their playoff stride, and they're doing okay recently. So
Yeah.
I think, they just want to continue to win as well, given everything with the standings. And, right now they're in the wild card spot. I think they would like to be in that 3 spot instead of Toronto.
Yeah, they're only 2 points behind Toronto, but the Leafs have a game in hand. Later on, 3:30 Eastern time, the Panthers and the Bruins. If the Panthers want any shot at first place, they need a regulation win.
Yep, absolutely. So, and I think that, this is definitely a prove it game for both these teams in terms of who's looking the best heading into the playoffs. So, love to see that on a Saturday afternoon.
Moving on, the Winnipeg Jets and the Minnesota Wild. The Jets are in, the Wild kind of on the outside looking in, but any little hope they may have of catching up, they need to win this game.
Right. And I don't think it's likely that the Jets could catch the Avalanche here. But if for some reason the Avalanche lose and the Jets keep winning, I mean, maybe they could get that 2 spot. So I think there is something to play for here.
We talked about the Maple Leafs and how close Tampa Bay is to them. They visit the Canadiens in a classic original six matchup, and the Leafs need a road win here.
Wouldn't the Montreal Canadiens love to win this game?
Oh,
That's all I
absolutely.
got to say about that.
You mentioned the Flyers at Columbus. Depending on the outcome of Friday's game, this may be a must win for the Flyers. And the Blue Jackets are not playing bad hockey as of late, despite all the difficulties and all the injuries they've been going through.
Yeah, it is interesting because they do have an incredible top line there. And so it's just a game to game thing for Columbus, I think. And they've been that way for quite a while now. And so, obviously, don't know if like Boone Jenner is going to return to the lineup yet or not. And what a horrible situation he's in, sending all of our love out to him and his family right now. But he's obviously a big piece of that team. And so it's either, is he there and they're playing for him? Is he not there and they're playing for him? Like there could be a lot of emotion going on with that team right now.
No question. Nashville visiting the New York Islanders, both these teams fighting for playoff position and trying to clinch playoff spots. So both teams definitely need that game. And, Nashville has sort of cooled off a little bit after that long winning streak, but they are always a dangerous team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think these two teams' styles don't really mix well. Like
No.
it just doesn't seem like things align. So it might be just a fun game to watch for that alone.
Yeah, and Nashville seems to have the Islanders' number as of late. Battle of Alberta, always fun. Edmonton battling for playoff position as well. And then the nightcap will be a great game at 10 o'clock, Vancouver in LA to face the Kings.
Yeah, and you wouldn't think that this is must win for both teams, but I kind of feel like it is.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Now, Sunday, we're up to 9 games. And here's, two teams that are right now on the outside looking in, but by the time the game is played Sunday, Detroit could be in a playoff spot. Buffalo,
Who knows?
Yeah, Buffalo and Detroit.
Yeah, it's a giant question mark, but if it has meaning, it'll be an intense game.
Ottawa visiting the Washington Capitals, and the Capitals are in a must-win situation.
Yeah, this is where Sunday, who knows? Now, there's a lot of combinations here of like pretty strong teams playing weak teams overall on Sunday. So this could be a good opportunity for some of those stronger teams that need to lock up some points to do so. But yeah, I think that the Caps in particular are probably the team to focus on for that day.
And then the nightcap for the weekend, Sunday, 10 o'clock Eastern time. This should be a great game. Dallas and Colorado.
Cannot wait. That is going to be a good matchup and, could look at what a playoff matchup might look like in later rounds.
No question. So lots of great games coming up this weekend. That's going to do it for us today. I will be back on Monday interviewing 3 of our local hosts about the biggest stories from around the league. Have a great weekend, everyone. Enjoy this race to the playoffs. And thanks for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.